Most of the stuff, as you say, we already knew about it. They'd announced most of the reversals of the stuff. 6 weeks ago, we all thought we were having a tax bonanza, and suddenly it's the opposite's true. Most, as I say, freezing thresholds was widely flagged. I'm not sure. I think there was a lot of stuff about the additional rate, whether it was going to be a lower threshold or even an increase in the rate. CGT stuff broadly never happened. That was the stuff that was really a lot in the papers over the weekend, that we were going to see increases in capital gains tax. That just never happened.
Adam, anything from you?
I think we possibly expected some changes in pension reliefs and the like. That also didn't really happen. So one thing we're going to be spending a lot of time now looking at is with the reduction in the higher rate band down to 125,000. We'll be looking at the differences between salaries and dividends now to see what effect that has for higher rate earners.
I think also, we were already going to have to do that with the increase in corporation tax, and it's just made that whole calculation a lot more complicated. We got away for quite a few years and we knew the answer before doing the work. Now we're going to have to do the work for most clients.
So just to recap on the the increase in the corporation tax rate to 25% from April 23. So that is a tapered increase. So for people and companies earning less than 50,000, they'll still be paying at 19%, and then from 50 to 250, that rate starts going up, getting to the 25%. The only thing that, guys, that if you have businesses or investment companies, you've got to be really careful with the number of companies that you've got that are part of the same group or associated by the same shareholders, and also investment companies. So for investment companies, being property-led companies and those type of companies, you'll pay tax at the top rate of 25%. You don't get that tapering relief. So you just got to be aware of that.
And whilst there's been a flat corporation tax rate, the old group company rules have been reasonably benign for most people. But when they expanded them, which wasn't in the budget, it was announced about, I think this time last year, they'd go back to the old style rules on associated companies. That's going to hurt a lot of people. That's a classic stealth tax. That's where you get an increase without having to change much other than a really technical rule that most people don't understand, and it has quite a profound impact on what people end up paying.
So we will be reviewing with our clients where you've got small companies that really aren't doing a lot. You've really got to review whether those companies are worth keeping, because it will affect the tax rate across all the companies. So that's really important. And also, come prior to April 23, what Adam was saying is that we will be reviewing in detail with every client, because every client's circumstances are so different, whether dividends are still tax efficient. To be honest, I can't remember the days that dividends aren't tax efficient. I think it was a long time ago when I was a junior, where people were giving big bonuses because they were the most tax efficient way to draw money from your company. I've got a funny feeling that's going to happen again with big bonuses, the way the tax rates are going. So we will be looking at that in detail with every client where they're sort of on that 100, 150 earnings limit.
Do you remember the days when they used to talk in every budget about simplifying people's taxes? And it seems to have gone completely the opposite way now. Everything is so much more complicated than it.
How many tax rates you got? You've got dividend tax rates, you've got CG tax rates, you've got company tax rates, and they're all different.
And they all interact as well. Yeah, the days when you could very simply do the calculations, it's all gone. You're now going to need to sit down with a clear head in a dark room and just kind of plough through for people.
That's why accountants charge big bucks for their advice. Is that right?
I think also you can see some increases probably in people paying in pensions into companies now with the increase in the corporation tax rate of 25%. The benefits that you'll get from that will be greater than had before, so that will also be something that will be a regular discussion, I think, now with all our clients when we're discussing their accounts and looking at ways of saving them some tax.
You got any questions over all of our listeners?
A lot of people are talking about marginal rates and have heard it mentioned that these could be over 60%. Can you explain quite in detail what this actually means and who it would apply to?
Yeah, so marginal rate of tax is the additional tax you pay on the next pound of profit. So, if you have an overall rate of corporation tax is a good example. So as Lee said, the new rate is tapered up. So in effect, it becomes 25% once the profits hit 250,000, and it's at 19% when they're less than 50. And in that range of 50 to 250 it scales up towards 25 overall, which means each additional the marginal rate in that bracket is 26.5%. So if you had profits of 75,000, you would have 50,000 at 19 and 25,000 at 26.5, and that would give you an overall rate of something like 20%. And when they talk about how marginal rates interact, you often find situations where by the time you've paid the corporation tax on profits, the additional tax on dividends that are drawn,
you lose your personal allowances.
Then you lose personal allowances, and when you go over 100,000, the overall impact on that additional pound of profit can be quite profound. It's even worse with property investors who still have income in their own names with property. I mean, I saw one the other day that had a marginal rate of tax of 135% on their rental income, and that's a real that's a real life situation. So the marginal rates of tax can be really penal. I mean, this particular guy I was talking to, he ends up paying more tax with his rental income than he actually brings in. And it's just mad, but it's real. And so when people talk about this stuff, it's not fantasy stuff, it's for real.
And one of the questions is simply, is this budget going to stick? Obviously, budget a couple of weeks ago was scrapped.
I think so, because they're already talking about setting rates, like benefit in kind rates for cars. They're already setting that for 5 years ahead, because now they've obviously realised they want to put some certainty in the market and the way that tax rates are working. Again, I think that's quite relevant as well with the electric cars. Having an electric car green person I am myself, that it's really important that at the moment the benefit in kind rates are really low. At the moment, 2% I think it is this year, but they have announced and said that by 25 it's going to go up to 5%. But even that, compared to diesel and petrol, is still way cheaper, because that extra 1% they're applying to the petrol and diesel cars as well. So you're still so much better off from a tax point of view with those electric cars. It's just a shame you can't charge your car anywhere, but it's
still a 500% increase on what you'd have been paying a year ago.
Correct, yeah, because it was zero. It was crazy.
2 years ago it was zero. It was 1% last year, and it's 5%.
But then you don't want to tell people that you didn't pay any tax on your dividends up to 45 grand a few years ago. Do you remember?
Yeah, let's not talk about it. Don't remind them of that. They feel
Depressing.
sick, weren't they? My answer to that question is, I'm not a politician, I don't know. But the other one, the last budget, did have a sense of fantasy politics about it. It was even when I was sitting listening to it, and my jaw just dropped to the floor. It was like, there's no way this. It just didn't have a sense of reality behind it. This one has a little bit more sort of basis in reality. It feels like, where we are, what actually needs to happen. No one likes it, but we all know it needs to happen.
And what's happening with income tax and national insurance in a little bit more detail?
Ed?
Well done. Well, I mean, they've frozen the personal allowances for another 4 years.
No, it's 2028.
2028.
I don't know how they know for sure they're going to still be in power in 2028 to impose
They
that.
probably won't be realistically, but yeah, so that's all been frozen. So that's also sort of been treated as it's a stealth tax. So there's no increase in those personal allowances. And the national insurance rate was already due to go up by 1.25. That was reversed previously.
So they do anything with the employment allowance? They left that 5,000. Did they leave that employment allowance?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
I think
if there's any change in that.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's when I hear about freezing the thresholds, it's worth mentioning that particularly the personal allowance threshold has gone up very quickly in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. It's gone up from sort of like, probably, I think it was only about 8,000 or 9,000 2 or 3, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's now at sort of nearly 13. So although they are freezing it, it's gone up well above inflation for the last few years.
The national insurance threshold went up, didn't it?
Yeah, and also the national insurance
that went up
threshold
by about 3,000,
Yeah.
not earlier this year. So there have been some increases, but that appears to now have been frozen for another 5-6 years. Although we'll have to wait and see, as Barry says, whether they're still in power at that point.
It will push everybody's rate up. Every year you get a pay increase, you'll just go into the next bracket, and that. I mean, for most people, they won't notice, I suspect, but it will particularly hurt low earners. That's all.
And rentals, the
Yeah.
way they changed the interest relief, it's going to be massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it has an even more.
Push that even more people in.
Yeah.
There was a big announcement which is sort of slipped through with R&D tax credits, so that was quite important. I think that the uplift, the credits that businesses got was 130% and that they've reduced that down to 86%.
86, which seems a bit of a random number to me.
It's really weird. So that's
done some numbers somewhere.
Anyone doing R&D, was that from April 23?
Yes.
I think so. So if you're doing R&D, then obviously you want to get it all done before April 23.
It's a lot less generous going forward. I know larger companies, they've made it more generous, but for most small, medium
The
enterprises...
credit's also reduced to 10%, isn't it, from 14? So that's a further...
They have said they're going to consult on bringing the two regimes together, so you don't have a small company regime for R&D and a large one. They're going to look to bring them into one sort of single relief, which makes more sense, to be honest.
And what about inheritance tax?
No change on
Where's Paul? We need Paul.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they've frozen. I mean,
They've
the nil rate band's been 325,000 for God knows how long, and they've frozen it till 2028. I mean, whilst it won't have an impact on most people, because most people, or at least a lot of people are still not paying inheritance tax, although particularly in the southeast of England that's less and less true. It will mean that a lot more estates do eventually end up having to pay, because values, particularly the largest asset most people have is their property, and the value of that is even now continuing to rise, and the thresholds are staying the same.
And if anyone does have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask your questions or pop them in the chat. Obviously, if they're more specific to your situation, then please drop us an email or a message on socials and we'll get back to you. One of the questions is, what elements of the budget affect employees versus employers?
And employers, apart from their own corporation tax rates, they didn't come out of it particularly badly. There was a lot of talk about them removing the employment allowance, which is the amount employers can pay in national insurance before they actually pay it. They get like is it £5,000 at first. There's also, employers' rates of national insurance were actually cut a couple of months ago, and that cut has been retained, one of the few things that has been retained. So they didn't come out of it too bad. Employees are taking most of the pain. As I say, the employer's been hit. Most employers will have been hit by an increase in corporation tax, but in terms of the taxes on what they pay their employers, there's not really much in the way of it change for employers, but there's quite profound changes for employees.
Okay, and the last one is, this person runs their own company. What is the single biggest thing that they need to take note of?
Corporation tax increase.
Yeah,
it will change the way they're paid, probably over, certainly maybe not this year, possibly next year, but certainly probably the year after that, as thresholds, corporation tax changing, and alongside income tax thresholds being frozen, and the additional rate being dropped, and the dividend rate changing. All of those things mean that, whereas for the last, as Lee said, however long time, most owner managers would have been paid a dividend to draw most of their income. There will still be a lot of that, but it won't be the no-brainer piece of tax advice you give people anymore, because everybody's circumstances will have to be factored in, because some people will no longer be able to be paid like that tax efficiently. You'll be worse off.
And the final thing...
Sorry. Yeah, so just to add on to that, so it's really important that if you do then go from a dividend, drawing your wages as a dividend to a salary, then you've got to make sure that then you've got enough cash in the business to pay your PAYE. So that's then obviously going to be paid monthly on a much higher amount than you're used to, because normally your dividend tax is paid twice a year personally. So from a cash flow point of view, and obviously putting money away to cover the 25% is really important. So they're the two, I think, main issues. And the good thing is then, if the company's paying the PAYE, you don't have to worry about finding the money personally to pay it.
Yeah.
And obviously there are some people who rely on R&D credits where they're spending lots on that, and they'll be getting less, they'll be receiving less going forward, so there'll be less cash coming. A lot of people, particularly start-up businesses that are losing money, they fund a big chunk of their cash flow needs through sort of R&D tax credits. Those are being reduced, so anyone in that situation will have to look elsewhere for cash, for sure.
Fine. And last thing, obviously in previous budgets there have been shout outs from, say, the hospitality sector saying they're being left behind, or self-employed people being left behind, or whatever it is. Who do you think, or are there any groups or industries or people that you think were left behind in this budget, and what would you have expected to have seen for them that wasn't included?
I think property investors have been bled dry for the last 5-6 years, and they got no help pretty much during COVID. In fact, they were probably penalised during COVID by the restrictions on being able to sue tenants who didn't pay their rent, restrictions on even though restrictions on even though the tenants were able to defer paying rents, you weren't in a position to defer mortgages for very long. It was 3 months. So they weren't really helped much during COVID, and they've been bled dry through the tax system. And now they've got higher mortgage rates. So if you're asking who's the problem is they're a group that no one feels much sympathy for, and I don't think that. I mean, I feel a great deal of sympathy for them because a lot of them are my clients. But the general perception out there is that these guys are wealthy, that they can afford it, that they are not providing something valuable to the economy, although they are. There's a shortage of property, and they're helping. If you're asking the group that's been left behind, I think they've been more than left behind. I think they've been penalised quite heavily.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else from your guys' point of view, self-employed or anything like that?
Well, anything with self-employed, they're going to have fun and games next year when the year after 24, when Making Tax Digital comes in, which is a whole other conversation where you've got to report quarterly your self-employed income and your rental income quarterly through software digitally. That's going to be a massive.
I think their ranks will be growing though, because I think there'll be more with the increase in corporation tax, the increase in dividend taxes. There's not so much. In fact, I would imagine there's almost nothing in it for very small businesses. Yeah. The desire to convert from being self-employed to a limited company for tax reasons alone, I suspect that will be quite marginal. Most very small businesses, the sorts of people who stay self-employed, those people will probably stay self-employed for sure, and the threshold at which it will be worth becoming a company, where you are grown to a certain level, will be much higher. And then, so from a purely tax perspective, I suspect a lot fewer people will be rushing through the doors from being self-employed to being a company, operating through a limited company.
Okay, that's all the questions that have come through. We will be releasing a summary and a recording of this session and sending that round after the session. Apologies to anyone who wasn't able to get in if you're watching this in a couple of hours through the recording. Technical issues, not our fault, promise. Any other questions, please email us at info@raffingers.co.uk or email your relationship partner if you're already a client. Thanks guys.
No worries, thank you.
Bye.